get started because Lissa's raring to go and Kayla's here with me. I'm Judy Clem with the Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory, and joining me tonight is Kayla Chase. She's our membership chair. She's also a master gardener, and she's going to help manage the room, manage the chat, where you can put any of your questions. And then at the end, she will kind of consolidate the questions and pose them to Lissa. So Kayla is very knowledgeable, and she will help run the program with me tonight. So I want to welcome you all to our first program of 2022. And as I was saying to some of you who joined us earlier, this program was going to be in person at the conservatory, and at the last minute, we were able to make it virtual, and 100 people signed up in the last 24 hours. So we're so excited to have you all here. As part of the Friends mission, we really want to help educate and inspire gardeners to become more confident in their endeavors. And so tonight's seed starting lecture is an example of that. And our next program in February is called The Art of Landscape Design. And it's actually featuring Patty Staley, who's joining us tonight. She's our Director of Horticulture at the Conservatory. And so these are just a few of the programs we have planned. There is a ton of stuff that Kayla's been working on, and you guys will really enjoy the full season of programming that we have. To tie in with tonight's program, you can see, just left the screen, the Conservatory has a huge selection of seeds available, and soil and gloves and other things to help you with your seed starting. So when you pop back over to the Conservatory, please check out the lovely selection of seeds we have there. Let me just take a step back for a second and give you a quick snapshot of this beautiful conservatory. It began as a community effort to house exotic plants that residents collected during their travels abroad. And it was built in 1929 and is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It's free to the public with 50,000 visitors annually. The conservatory offers a rich atmosphere through 3 indoor showrooms, and it features more than 3,000 plants. So hopefully you'll come visit. The winter seems to be a very popular time, so you can get out of the cold and into this tropical environment we offer there. As a member of the Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory, you can take advantage of early shopping for our annual plant sale. It's probably one of the biggest benefits we offer. And the sale offers a large selection of vegetables, herbs, and flowers that are all grown, many unique varieties too, that are all grown in our greenhouses at the conservatory. So one of the special benefits to members is that you get early shopping. So the first 12 days and the biggest selection is available to members. And then we are also offering our members only pickup day. So special features, and there's a ton of other member benefits you can learn about on our website. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce our special guest this evening. You may know Lissa Dysart from the Sugar Beet Co-op, where she is the marketing director at this local store. But many of us know her as the Tomato Lady. Lissa's craving for quality homegrown tomatoes comes from her childhood experience. Growing up in Crystal Lake, there was a farm nearby with community plots. Her family would garden there and have tons of tomatoes and eat them all summer long. Years later, to counter those tasteless grocery store tomatoes, Lissa used a 5-gallon bucket to grow a tomato plant on a fire escape while she was living in a Chicago apartment. And we can all relate. I'm sure we're doing whatever we can to get fresh produce. So now, as the Tomato Lady, inside her Oak Park home, planting starts by February. The plants are grown organically and non-GMO heirloom varieties, and she starts the seeds after culling through garden catalogs during these cold winter months. As Lissa says, it has grown into a small cottage industry, and it's a great way to get her gardening as early as January and tending the plants as a way to connect with other people who are fans of gardening, growing, and food. So I am thrilled that our friend Lissa is here, and I'm going to ask her to share her screen. And we'll start our presentation. Yay, Lissa, take it away.
Hi, sorry, it's telling me of multiple, let's see. Yeah, funny. Okay, here we go. Well, thank you, Judy, for contacting me, asking me to do a presentation. As you said, I started my love of tomatoes early on, gardening as well as a child, with my mom mainly, but also riding across town to go tend to the vegetable garden with both my parents. And then when I moved out, I ended up with terrible hothouse tomatoes that taste terrible. So I was inspired to go search out something that was delicious and what I remembered. And I think that looking for unusual varieties is what started me in seed starting, and then kind of being able to start gardening early is what also added to that. So the combination. And part of why I love talking to people about seed starting is because you can do it with so little. And I think sometimes people think you have to have a big setup or it has to be really advanced, expensive, et cetera. And that really isn't the case. So hopefully either I'm going to give you inspiration to start this year, or I'm going to give you tips that you didn't know about to make your seed starting better. But that's kind of my goal. So hopefully we succeed. So this is a little bit of what Judy already told you about, my background, and you can see over on the right-hand side, the insanity of how many seedlings I have come from and how many I'm at now. So it's a little bit, it's called tomato season in my house right now because it starts and it's a big process, but it is still a passion project, and it is pleasant work. So that's good. So again, the main reasons why you would want to start your own seeds. You get better selection. You can get varieties that you will never find for sale anywhere. You control the source of where the seeds and the plants are coming from. So if you specifically want them to be, open pollinated or organic or non-GMO or whatever the case may be, you get to control all of that. You save money, you are investing your time, but again, it's a labor of love for most people, and you get to watch them grow. So that's awesome. You will have seedlings that are acclimated to this environment. So they're not grown in some other state under different context and then shipped here and then has to acclimate to the Midwest. And I do feel like that has an impact. I don't know, I could be making that up. And then you get to start earlier in the year gardening. And that is one of the things that really hooked me in to keep on doing it every year, is to be able to go down into my basement and visit my seedlings and see all their exciting green growing nature down there when it's cold and snowy outside. And as an example, this was last year. We got snow just in time for this year. Outside, what that looked like, and then little happy growing things are the ultimate winter pick-me-up. So this is definitely one of the prime motivators for seed starting that I didn't necessarily expect, but it's a pretty fun bonus. If you are looking at what you should start from seed, there are a few things that you can think about. A, what are you excited to grow and eat? What do you love to eat? What are you going to be excited about getting that new variety of? It only makes sense to grow things that you actually enjoy eating. If everybody else loves growing spinach and it's not your cup of tea, then stick to what you really love and are excited about. What grows well in your region or garden space? I ironically don't have a great garden for tomatoes, so I kind of have to plug them in where I have enough sun. But I have other things that I can grow in a shady garden. So kind of getting to know what your specific garden space has for its little microclimates, et cetera. And that is also, what do you have space or sunlight for? If you have a tiny garden, you're probably not going to want to grow winter squash because they vine all over the place, but you might want to grow herbs because you get a really great bang for your buck in a small space. You know, again, if you cook or if you don't cook, that all impacts it as well. What do you have time for? Some plants are a little more high maintenance than others, so that's something to take into consideration. And a suggestion, if you're a new gardener, start with a group of plants that you're excited about, and then you can always expand from there. So if you start just a few varieties your first year, you can kind of concentrate on those and make sure you have the time and energy to take care of them, and then you can go from there. So the seed starting is kind of divided mainly into direct sow or start inside. So how you decide what a plant falls under, usually the seed package will tell you that information. It'll say it doesn't, you know, it wants to be planted inside because it needs a head start, or it doesn't want to be moved. So direct sow are things that you would plant outside. You're not going to want to either dislodge their roots, or they're a root plant. Usually they want to be planted directly in the ground outside. There are a lot of plants that are cooler weather, like peas, kale. Those can all be planted outside very easily. So those you can plant inside, but it's really easy to plant outside. Yeah, so they would be directly seeded in the garden bed. And that isn't really what I'm talking about tonight, because hopefully you've already, you know, planted seeds. So you're technically still starting seeds, but it's a little different realm. So I start a fair amount of things that would be normally direct sow inside. And these two things on the screen here are my challenges. So I have a small yard, and I have a lot of wildlife that likes to rearrange things for me. So I find that if I start something indoors, I can be better able to take care of it and mind it and monitor it as it's germinating and growing. And then I can also put it exactly into the spot that I have for it and not have to remember to water several different spaces in my yard, because I tend to interplant plants in with the ornamentals. So that's kind of my situation, but there are reasons that you might want to start things indoors that you normally would start outside. And those are them. Oops, sorry, I went backwards. Let's go forwards. How do I do that? One more. All right. So a lot of plants have a longer grow season than, or need a longer grow season to fruit than we have here in Chicago, including aforementioned tomatoes. So those are the things that will really benefit from having a head start inside. I mentioned here some things like onions are started like in January. Even, I mean, pansies are started in January too. Those are a couple of things that are really long grow season prior to your outdoor season. And then some things are started much later, like melons. If you are starting them inside, they only want a short time period before they go outside because they don't want to develop too much roots. And then tomatoes and peppers are kind of in between. So how do you know what does everything need? Well, most seed packets will have a lot of information for you. This is an example of one giving you where, like, how many days before the last frost you would want to plant them. The last frost is the average last frost that happens in the springtime in a certain region. And we are in growing region 6A. So I put the date in here, didn't I? No, I didn't. Uh-oh. It's on the next page, sorry. So once you know what your last frost date and you look at your seed packet, or you research it if it's not on your seed packet, you count back from that date to when you would want to start your seeds. There's also charts online that you can look this up, which I will show you on another page. This is the zone map for Illinois. So we're all the way up in the corner, right by Lake Michigan. We have that mitigating factor of Lake Michigan. That is why we're in a warmer hardiness zone than other areas out a little further out from the lake. Okay, here we go. Estimated last frost date is April 20th. So if I have a seed that tells me start your seeds 5 weeks before that, I just count back on my calendar and I know that's when I'm going to start my seeds inside. So they're going to be ready to go for the spring planting outside. Pardon me, sorry. All right. So these are a couple of charts that have your planting times. You can see the one on the left has 2 different segments. That's because you can actually plant things like beets, both in the spring and in the fall. We're just going to talk about spring here because I don't want to overload you, but you can plant again in the summer for your fall crops. Right now, we're just looking at spring. So this will all give you an idea of the green would be starting your plants indoors. Then when you would transplant them outdoors, and then your harvest. So this would give you a little visual idea of when things are going to be planted and when they're going to move out into the outside garden. Okay, so what do you need to start seeds? Very basic, but there are some things that are pretty much absolutes. Obviously seeds, some type of soil, containers, light source, water, time, and patience. I would say the one thing I see people not using or not acquiring is a light source, and that ends up being problematic because you really do need some source of light for them, not just a sunny window. Most of us don't have a greenhouse level sunshine, so we do need some other addition to that. But the rest of it is, and even that is pretty basic. You can use a shop light. We'll talk about that in another slide. But you know, containers can be a yogurt container. They can be seed flats. It's very whatever you want. It just can be very simple. It can be more elaborate, but I'm more on the simple vein. But optional, but very useful. A plug-in timer to keep your lights going on and off for the right length of time each day. Germination lid or covers just to keep your soil and seeds moist while they are germinating. A heat mat changes the temperature, so it's a little warmer than room temperature, which most seeds like for germination. An electric fan helps move the air and reduces some issues, fungal or damping off, things that can help with that. To harden them off once they're grown, a temporary greenhouse or cold frame is helpful. And a thermometer so that you know what the temperature is in your space or when you're moving them outdoors. So seeds, you can buy them, you can save them from previous plants, you can swap them at a seed swap. Once you've figured out what you want to grow, then you get to go find the sources for that. As Judy said, the Conservatory is selling seeds this year. I do a lot of mail order. And then, as she also mentioned, I'm at Sugar Beet. One of the things I do there is I do the seed ordering. So we do carry the Seed Savers and the Baker's Creek at the co-op. We are en route right now, so we will have our seeds up by Monday or Tuesday, hopefully. And like I said at the bottom, local seed swaps and garden groups are also great resources for seeds. So there are a couple Facebook groups. There are other groups beyond that. A lot of area garden groups either do formal seed swaps or they will do informal seed swaps where somebody will say, I have, milkweed seed. Anybody want some? And you can find a free resource for seeds or to share your seeds that you've saved there, which is fantastic. All right, like I said, anything that holds soil and moisture is a container. So as simple as a yogurt container, You know, a seed flat is more traditional where it has multiple little holes. There are a lot of different options here. You can just be creative and either reuse or resource. I do use a lot of plastic seed starting trays for my setup. They're reusable, which is beneficial to me, and they obviously have a lot more capacity than individual yogurt cups, but I've used it all. I truly have. Make sure they're clean. If you're reusing them, if they've had soil on them, you want to give them a bath in a 10% bleach solution so that you can kill off anything that may have been hanging out on there from the previous season. Germination domes are just a plastic lid that goes over a traditional tray, but I also use those, you know, 1 gallon salad containers that are clear, have a clear lid, and they're a plastic container. That's a great germination container. I'll pop pots in there with seeds and put the lid on, and that will contain the moisture and just keep it at the same level as I started. So it's not too damp and not too dry. And it also can retain some of the warmth if you're able to heat it up a little bit in your space to add to that fast germination. Soil, generally a soilless mix is recommended because you don't have any chance of having virus or evil pathogens coming in on your sterile soilless mix. You can make an easy homemade mixture with these breakdown here on the screen. And then you would start fertilizing after the first set of true leaves shows up. So the very first leaves that come out of a seed are the seed leaves. And then the first leaves that look like the actual plant leaf. So you'll notice, like, usually the seed leaves are usually ovoid. They're the size and shape approximately of the actual seed. And then the next set of leaves are what looks like the actual plant. So those are true leaves. And when those show up is when you would start fertilizing. Lighting, like I said, you need some kind of light source. Otherwise, your plants are going to be reaching to try to get in more light. And a lot of people have seen their plants where they grow really, really, really tall, but really thin and not healthy. That is termed as a leggy plant. It means that it has been reaching to try to get enough light. So get a fluorescent light or an LED light. I put the specifics here, cool white fluorescent or an LED 6500K. They're very inexpensive. And, you know, if you just have like a few seed starts you want to do, you get one light, you either put it in the basement or you put it in a spare room or closet. It doesn't even matter where it is. And then just keep it close to the plants and keep it on a timer. Why did I not put that on here? Sorry. Oh, I did 16 to 18 hours per day. I just have everything on a timer, so I don't have to worry about it. It turns it on, it turns it off. I just have to check and make sure that they're, you know, as they grow, I'm changing the level of the light. I want to keep it very, very close to the plant so that it gets the maximum light possible. And like I said, I use S hooks and chain and cup hooks. I have hooks into the ceiling in my basement, and I have chains that come down, and I have little S hooks, and I just kind of adjust up the light as I need it for each of the shelves. So here is one of the setups in my basement. On the left here, you can see the little tiny sprouts of all the little seedlings that have germinated. And you can see the multiple different types of containers and pots and whatnot that I start seeds in. And then on the right, it shows you once I've transplanted them into their individual little seed cells and they've grown on a little bit, but I'm keeping that light level just above the plants so that they stay nice and close to the light source. And then on top of that, I also use the those thermal bags, I know like Amazon Prime uses them. They're those reflective bubble wrap, basically. And I cut those open and I lay them across the top of my light fixtures and on the back side of the shelves a lot of times, so that I can reflect as much of the light back onto the plants and it's not going all over the room. Because that's going to add more light to their ability to keep growing and get bigger. So those are my little secret tips, not so secret, but you can see this is a very basic, this is an IKEA shelf on the left with some LED lights. I have little cup hooks and chains. I mean, it is very basic, but it works like a charm, and not a huge investment for how many plants come out of this area. Oh, crud, what did I do? Let's try this. Sorry, guys. There we are. All right, so once you have started, you have your supplies gathered, you figured out what you're growing, you know your timing, it's almost time to start seeds. One other thing you want to think about, it's kind of a main delineation, is that there are kind of two main ways of seed starting. One is at the top here, where it's a bunch of seeds all in one container. And then those are separated out into individual containers once you have true leaves. And the benefit there is you get your maximum amount of plants germinating in a minimum amount of space. You also can select the seedlings that are the healthiest and continue to grow those on. So that's the benefit to that side. On the bottom here, you see a tray that has an individual seed in each one, or you could do 2 seeds and then clip out one. This is a lot more space per seedling. It's personal taste, kind of. I do a little bit of both. And I would say probably the most common is starting with the bottom version. But the top is kind of a nice methodology because, like I said, you get to select out which ones are the healthiest, the biggest, and then you can decide to grow them on. You can decide how many you want to grow on from there. Although I will tell you that when I started doing this, and I had to then cull less big, healthy, whatever, or I didn't need them, seedlings, that's kind of how I ended up being the tomato lady, because I could not bear to kill off extra plants and I would pot on everything, and then started by giving them away and then ended up selling off the extras at some point. So beware. All right, so when you've decided how you're going to plant, you have your seeds, how deep you plant it, again, will mostly be on the seed packet, but if for some reason it's not, it's traditionally twice the diameter of the seed. So you're going to make either you're going to make a hole for a single plant, or you're going to level off your soil with enough distance to the top. You're going to be able to add that height above it after you've put the seeds in there. Remember to label your pots. That is something I have learned from experience, not to think that you're going to remember what on earth this plant is or recognize it once it comes up, because as a baby, it doesn't necessarily look like the adult. Then light. So for germination, most seeds don't need light. There are some that do. They usually are the ones that will tell you to either surface sow or put a very thin level of soil on top of it. So you can germinate your seeds and then move them under lights after they have germinated. I'm kind of a lazy gardener in that sense that I just want to be able to have it already there and not have to worry about it. So I just germinate everything with lights over them. And that way I know as soon as they've germinated, they have light. I don't have to worry about moving them so they don't get leggy. You know, I just keep them under lights. They don't need them, but it's usually a few days difference. It's not that big of a deal, but just not necessary. Temperature. Like I mentioned earlier, most seeds like warm temperatures to germinate. They're used to waiting for spring to break, so they want to feel like it's warm enough that they're going to germinate and survive. There are some seeds that have other needs for germination that isn't heat-based. Those will definitely be on your seed packet, or if not, do some research on your plant. But sometimes they need something called cold stratification, where it actually needs some cold time before it will allow the seed to germinate. There's some that need the seed to actually, the coat to actually be damaged to allow moisture in. And this is all methodologies for that seed to know that it can germinate in a safe time for its natural habitat. But the vast majority of seeds that you run into, and particularly with vegetables, herbs, that kind of thing, they tend to just be across the board warm temperature germination. Like I said, a heat mat isn't necessary, but can speed things up. It will definitely almost cut your germination time in half. But if you're like, I'm good, I have all the time in the world, just put it in a warm temp room and they will germinate. Just take a few days longer, so not that big of a deal. Ideal temps for most seeds are about 70 to 75 degrees. And then, like I said, some cruciferous veg will germinate at cooler temperatures, but they'll also germinate at that temperature. And then after they've germinated, this is another mistake that I see people doing. If you have them on a heat pad, take them off. If you have them in a warm room, put them in a cooler room. Again, basement is ideal in a lot of our homes. They will get leggy again, not only from not having enough light, but also from being too warm. So they like to grow on in a cooler temperature, usually 60 to 65 degrees. So make sure that you're keeping that in mind, because it can have an effect on your plants. And I have seen a lot of people having issues with their seedlings and not realizing how much, that germination temperature versus the growing on temperature, that there is a difference there, and that impacts the plant. Moisture. When you first are planting your seeds, you're going to moisten the soil to begin with, and then you're going to water them in just so that the seed has contact with the soil. And then you generally, if you're putting a cover on it, you generally don't need to water again until they've germinated. You don't want things to be super waterlogged, because too much moisture will tend to cause more issues like dampening off and things that are not gonna help your seedlings, or they're gonna not survive. So moisten it, water them in, cover it, leave it. Once they have sprouted, you can water them from the bottom, and that will encourage their roots to grow down to that water. Again, you don't want to overwater them. You don't want to keep them waterlogged. We tend to kill all plants, house plants, seedlings, everything. We tend to overwater them to death rather than underwater them. So be careful not to overwater them. And like I said, water from the bottom is good. For germination, putting the pot into a closed container, covering with a clear lid, or like the salad container I mentioned, you can put that pot in a plastic bag, just so that you're keeping kind of a consistent moisture level, giving it the idea that it's this nice, warm, moist spring soil and it's ready to go. And then as soon as they sprout, take them out of that bag, take the lid off. You want to have them have good air circulation as soon as possible. So I think sometimes people, they'll have their lid on their little germination tray and they see the seeds sprouting and they don't want to, like, I don't know, make a harsh environment for them or something. So they keep the lid on far longer than they really need to. And that really increases the chances of things like damping off. So as soon as you see them sprout, take that lid off. They're fine. Keep watering them from the bottom. That's what I just did. Okay, good. Sorry, y'all. Okay, so growing on is the period of time after germination. So as you're growing on, they are growing bigger, but before they are going outside, being hardened off, being planted. If you started your seeds in a soilless mix, your seeds have all of the fertility that they need in the seed to a certain point. So that's why you can use a soilless mix. You don't need to have something that has compost or fertilizer in it until they get to this point where they're actually starting to grow true leaves and growing the rest of their plant. At that point, you want to start fertilizing, but you'll use a quarter the dosage of a normal plant of your fertilizer. You know, kelp or fish emulsion, those are great, slightly stinky, but they're great seedling fertilizers. Worm castings are really, really great for specifically for seedlings. And then, like I said, use a fan to move air so you can help decrease any fungal issues. I don't start with a soilless mix because I don't want to keep two different mixes. I'm just very, very careful about, you know, air circulation, how I'm watering, taking that lid off of the germination chamber. If I do have anything that's damping off, I remove that plant material immediately so that it doesn't spread. And I kind of know like it's going to happen a little bit, but I just, in my realm, I don't have the capacity to have two different mixes. So that's just me. Do as I say, not as I do. I don't know. People will come for you with pitchforks if you say you can use a seed starting mix that has compost in it, but you actually can. Not to confuse everybody, but. All right, so when I talked about the either planting together or planting individually, those two different options, if you're planting them together in a little clump, like one pot with a bunch of seeds in it, you are going to transfer those out into individual pots once they have two sets of true leaves. So you want to give them enough growth so that you have something you can handle and they have a little bit of strength, but you don't want them to get too rooted into that pot. I already talked about growing temps. Keep adjusting the lights just above them so they don't get leggy. And then, so this is the transplanting method for that clump to singles, but you would also use this system basically for transplanting in general. You just wouldn't break them all apart. So for the system where you grow a bunch of seeds together and then you separate them out, you would take your pot and you basically gently like hold your hand over the sprouted seeds and you pop it around just like you would with any other plant that you're going to transplant, although you just have a lot more seeds in there. Pull it apart, and then you're just kind of gently going to massage the roots to get them to kind of loosen up from one another. Make sure that you're gentle with them, particularly the stems, because that's the thing that the plant can just not regrow, basically. Leaves, if you damaged a leaf, it can regrow a leaf. If you damage a root, it can regrow a root. The stem, though, it can't. So a lot of instructions will tell you to like hold the seedling by the leaf rather than the stem. So if you're cautious, you're not sure, you are confident about how you're handling your seedlings, handle it by this leaf, and then you'll be good. So you're going to get it separated out into single individual seedlings, and then you transplant those either into individual pots, or these were going into another seed starting tray. So they're each individual little cell to grow in. Generally speaking, you would transplant them to the same level of the soil that they were in the pot they germinated in. There are a few exceptions, tomatoes being one of them. They will grow roots all along that stem, whatever is submerged. So I plant my tomatoes very deep. Everything else, I'm going to plant right at the same soil level it was in the seed germination pot, so that it's at the right level. I'm just transferring to its new home in its individual pot, so it has enough space and enough soil and enough room around it so that it can grow, continue to grow. There we go. Okay, so one of the pieces that you will know about each of your plant types that you're growing from seed is what temperature it will want to be planted out. The seed packet will tell you either, you know, X number of weeks after the last frost, or X number of weeks before the last frost, or when soil temps are generally a specific temperature. And if you're unsure, you can also just do a quick Google search and you will find out what that is. Different plants are different. So some of them, again, like kale, cruciferous veg, Asian greens, peas, they're all fine in very cold temperatures. But things like basil, peppers, tomatoes, they don't like anything under 50 degrees. And they not only don't like it, but it is incredibly harmful to them. And they will actually, it will actually harm them and their production levels throughout the year. So I used to think, oh, they'll be fine, they'll be fine. And then I kind of read a little more about it and realized that I should be a little nicer to them. So now I have a lot of thermometers and I pay attention to the weather and I make sure that they are in their temperature preferences. So hardening off is the term for acclimating your seedlings who have been in their very, very specific, not very varied climate in your home to be acclimated to the outdoor world and wind and rain and different temperature shifts and all of those things. They're just not ready for those. If you just took them out there and put them out there 24/7 right from the get-go, they would potentially not survive and definitely not be happy. So what you do is you slowly allow them a little bit of time, more and more each day, so that they can get used to it. They can learn how they actually open and close their pores of their leaves, depending on how much wind there is and the temperature and how much moisture and all these things that they have to like get used to. It's kind of like when we get used to the cold weather each winter, and where 50 degrees feels cold in the fall, but it feels warm in the spring. You're just reacclimating these plants to what it's going to be like outside. You can either do that kind of a manual way where you would take them out and back inside each day for a little bit longer, or you can use a little temporary greenhouse or a cold frame. You could put like a row cover or something over them, just something that's going to help mitigate a little bit of that temperature change. And then also keeping track of what the temperature and the weather is as you're doing this, so that even if they are fully acclimated, you don't want to leave them out there if there's a freeze, because that's a little extreme. This picture shows me standing with one of the little temporary greenhouses that I use. They are not too expensive, and if you're going to do a decent amount of seed starting, they're really helpful not to have to schlep trays of plants into your house and back out several times a week. But either way works. So this is the methodology with doing it manually, where you're going to take them outside and back in. You don't want to necessarily like take them out and like, oh, it's so nice, I'll put them right in the sunshine. That's a little too much for them. They need to build up their resistance and tolerance of it. So make sure you're taking them out into the shade initially. You're going to work them up to this full, real sunny world. So take them out a little bit at a time in the shade, keep track of the weather forecast. And again, once they're spending full nights and days outside, they should be fine, but keep an eye on that wacky spring weather that we usually have. Here are some fun resources that I have recently been looking at or adding to for your entertainment. This is a no-dig gardener in the UK who has a great social media presence. A Way to Garden is a woman in Maine. She's in zone 5B, so it's a little colder than us, but she has a lovely garden and a great podcast and email newsletter. Elliot Coleman is kind of a Four Seasons pioneer, a wonderful gardener, has great books and information on the website. And then I have a Pinterest board. I just figured I'd share that if anybody wanted to check out what I was up to or what I was keeping for future reference. I put that on there too. So that's what I have.
Awesome. Thank you. There's a couple questions in the chat, actually, if we could go through them.
Yeah.
So one of the questions is, do seeds ever expire?
They do, and different seeds have different lifespans. I have a chart of them, but you could easily actually Google that too. If you keep them cool and dry, usually in some kind of airtight container, I know some people actually keep them in the freezer. They are going to have a longer lifespan than if you kept them like above your refrigerator or somewhere where it's going to be warmer and more exposed to your home temperature and humidity levels. But it depends. Some things, I've planted tomato seeds that were 10 years old, and then there's other things that only last like a year or two.
Gotcha. So are soil moisture meters helpful to tell you when to water, or is there other ways to kind of, because I know you talked a little bit about overwatering. Are there any key things to notice?
I haven't ever used a soil moisture meter. I tend to just touch the soil and see how it's doing moisture wise. You know, if you stick your finger down into the soil, it'll give you an idea. And the more that you do that, the more you're going to know like, oh, this is a watered plant, or this is a dry plant. Another thing I read that was really smart was Ken Druce is another great garden photographer. He's wonderful. He would have you soak your seeds, your started seed trays in water, and then how you gauge if they have enough moisture is how that tray feels, which is brilliant. You don't have to worry, you can't tell how much water is in there, but you can tell like, oh, this is a watered seed tray versus trying to guess. So those are my methodologies. A moisture meter might be great. I just never have used one.
Gotcha. There's actually also a tip in the chat about using eggshells for seed starting containers. Have you ever done that, or?
I have seen that, but I have never used them. They're kind of small to me. I mean, my plants, by the time they go out into the yard, are definitely much larger than an eggshell. So you would have to transplant them. And in order to transplant them, you would have to actually either remove or break up that eggshell. So I haven't ever been tempted to use that methodology, although I've seen a lot of people talk about it. I kind of like something I can either plant the whole thing and it's permeable by the roots, or remove it from its pot in order to transplant it into the garden.
Gotcha. So when you're growing those seeds inside, do you have a recommended light type or light source?
I mean, not specifically, like I said, either oh my goodness, like a shop light with a cool white bulb is enough light for seeds starting. When they first start out, they don't need full spectrum lighting. So you can get away with a cool white, just a fluorescent bulb, or an LED light that's 6,500 Kelvin is the closest to sunlight. Those are relatively inexpensive nowadays. When I started out, it was all shop lights. Now I have a mix of shop lights and the LED lights. But as long as you have that, like those temperatures of the lighting, and then you're keeping it close and you are keeping it on the 16 to 18 hours a day, that will give you enough lighting. So I don't have a specific like brand. I'm thrifty, so I kind of use whatever makes sense economically. And I have a whole mix of different lights in my basement.
Gotcha. So you speaking of basements, I know you're talking a little bit about LEDs, and I know that those don't generate heat, but do those shop lights generate heat? And should you be using maybe a heat mat or something if you're growing stuff in the basement?
They do generate heat, and I have seen people who have purposely put like their germinating seeds on a shelf right above the fluorescent lights, because they do have that heat component. I have actual heat mats to start my seeds with, just because I'm doing a lot and I'm moving them in and out quickly. And I bought one years and years and years ago, not knowing much about it, and it was great and I loved it. So I'm slightly sold on those. But this year I actually am going to set up a shelf on my main level of my home, which is warmer than my basement, to use for germination. So it's a little warmer. So my plan is to germinate upstairs and then move into the basement where it's cooler, and I keep it cooler to grow on. I have also done to try to get a lot of stuff to germinate at the same time in the basement. I have actually set up one of the covers from my temporary greenhouses over shelves in the basement to kind of like keep some of that warmth together, keep the moisture together. Friends of mine who are in Oak Park, they actually built a germination chamber out of an old freezer. It's like the coffin freezer stood on its end with a crock pot. I mean, it's amazing. A crock pot in it. It's got a thermostat. I don't have the energy to build that, but that's another like way of, thermally insulating the space that you're germinating in, and then adding some like warmth and moisture. That's what you're kind of thinking of, like, okay, I want to keep it warm. And then, if the rest of the basement isn't warm enough, how am I going to insulate this space from the rest of it? Whether it's that little individual container with the lid, or it's using a heat mat, but again, if you didn't, they're probably going to germinate. It's just going to take longer.
Gotcha. So speaking of lights, how close is too close when it comes to lights?
The fluorescents will actually dry out your leaves if they are touching. The LEDs don't seem to really have that problem. So, a half inch to an inch away from it is probably good, but they're pretty tolerant of it. Even with the fluorescents, if a little bit of it is touching it and it gets singed or dried out, the plant will still continue to be okay. Once you're going to move it though, once you see that.
So speaking of kind of, separating your plants out and moving, there's a question, you use the term dampening off. Would you like to, would you mind explaining that a little bit more in detail?
Yeah, it's basically what it will look like is, here's your seedling and here's your soil level, and your plant will just fold over and it'll look like it needs water, and you may try watering it more and it doesn't revive it. It's a disease that kills off the seedling, and it just happens to like do something right at that soil level so that it falls over. So dampening off is one of the most common reasons for a seedling to die. And it's fungal, it's either fungal or viral, I can't remember, sorry. But moisture is what really advances its ability to do that. So making sure you're not overwatering, having a fan so you have nice air circulation so that it doesn't get too humid or give it a chance to really get started. That's what it looks. It's just it looks like a sad seedling.
Gotcha. So speaking of the fan, are you constantly running the fan, or are you doing it in cycles?
I've seen different setups, and I have to admit, I don't use a fan. It's the best practice though that I should be doing. I've seen people use the little like a fan you would use to build a computer out, and they put those on each of their shelves, which is kind of smart. I've seen, a box fan hanging from the ceiling, and it's constant air circulation, basically, is what you're looking for.
Gotcha. So let's see, there's another question that Taylor got their first temporary greenhouse for this year. Where should they put it? Sunny spot, and then how do you do a hardening using it?
Generally speaking, sun is good. I don't have full sun, so I never have to worry about it. You can have it, it can get too warm, or it can have sun scald. So if you have like crazy full day from sun up to sundown sun, you might want a little bit of shade in there. But I don't think most of Oak Park has that problem. I think we mostly have a lot of trees and other things, but yes, sun, partially it's giving you that greenhouse effect of warming up the interior. And how you're going to use it for hardening off is your plants can go in there and not have to go back and forth in between outside, inside, outside, inside. But what you are going to do is keep track of how warm or cool it is each day with that sun effect. And you're going to open, like if it's warm enough during the day, you're going to open up the greenhouse so it can have air in, it can have wind effect, it can have that touch with reality of like what the climate is outside. And then you're going to close it at night. Some days it's not going to be warm enough to open it at all, and you're just going to leave it closed. Last year that we got a cold spell later in the spring, and I was using the crock pot out and heaters in my greenhouses because it was too cold. At that point, you could bring stuff inside. I think if you put a thermometer in your greenhouse, it will help you, if you have one, it will help you gauge what the temperature is inside that space. But generally speaking, you're going to open it on warm days, close it at night, keep it closed on cool days, watch for freezing temperatures. The usual gauge is that one layer of cover, whether it's a greenhouse, whether it's a row cover, whatever it is, gives you like that cold hardness zone. It gives you one zone warmer. So if you kind of think of, like middle Illinois, that's what your greenhouse is kind of going to be like. But again, you got to make sure it's not going to get too hot. And then if it is really freezing cold and you have sensitive plants, you may have to bring them inside. So I don't know if that helped. It's great because you, generally speaking, can just put it out there and like make sure you're opening it during the day, closing it at night. That's the basics.
Gotcha. Okay. And then do you have any recommendations for small space growing? So maybe in an apartment, any plant type specifically, any methodology, any sort of insights there?
I mean, you are probably container growing then, I'm guessing, which the key to container growing is having enough space for the plant. So like a 5-gallon bucket is big enough for one tomato plant. But things like herbs or lettuces, you probably won't have full sun, I'm guessing. Again, I'm thinking containers, I'm thinking like a back porch or something. So those things are going to impact what you're choosing, but salad greens tolerate not full sun. They also tolerate smaller containers. Like I said before, herbs are always the biggest bang for the buck. If you cook at all, having fresh herbs is amazing. So having a basil plant or a thyme plant, to me, is a great asset and looks good while you're growing it. Keeping good fertilization in your containers. So because you're not having natural connection to the full breadth of the earth, you're going to want to make sure that you're fertilizing regularly so they have enough food source to grow. And they're going to need watering. Whereas if you're growing in the ground, you probably don't need to water much once they're established, unless it's a really long dry spell. With containers, you're going to have to water probably every day. sometimes even more than once a day. So it's a little like there's a little more maintenance with it, but also you can grow things. You just have to look for stuff that will be happy in containers. And people ask me that for tomatoes, and there are determinate tomatoes that only grow up to a certain height and then stop, that are good for planter growing. And I also recommend cherry tomatoes. So they're a smaller fruit, and you tend to get smaller fruit in general in container growing, but like you would have a more likelihood that you're going to get to a fruit with a cherry tomato. So that's a good option for a container growing as well.
Awesome.
Hopefully that was what they were asking. I'm not.
Yeah, I love all these tips. Are there more questions, Kayla?
I think that's just, I think that was it. I mean,
Sure.
in addition to obviously Patty is selling seeds, and then I think you had a list of other seed vendors. So you're just kind of, Googling online, searching. That's kind of where you're finding your seeds. And also the seed swap, I think, is something you also suggested, which is a great way to get seeds too. So.
Great. Well, you guys are welcome to unmute if you want to say hi, or if you have any other questions. I work very hard at trying to start seeds, but sometimes it gets a little out of hand. And I think the best advice that I could offer on top of everything that Lissa has shared is that you've got very little to lose. Like if you just go in and try it and experiment, you'll learn from it, and then you'll get confidence, and then you can try it again next year. I often have, hi, Mary O'Kersey. Mary O'Kersey runs our, the garden at Cheney Mansion. So we've got a lot of good knowledge here. I run the garden at Oak Park Temple. It's a community garden, and I just call it an experimental garden or a learning garden because I'm trying and learning as I go. And I don't have the background that Lissa does or master gardeners, but I feel like it can't hurt to try growing corn there because we have the space and we have the sun, and let's see what works. And so I just encourage you to really be open to trying it. And then if it doesn't work out, you'll learn and you'll know for next time. So I think one of the articles I read about Lissa was that anybody can do it, right? Anybody can be, growing these things. And Lissa's program just kind of took off and got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so she ran with it. And I think most of us are trying to get a few things going just because it's fun and, good to learn around it. So feel free to unmute. I just want to thank you, Lissa, and all of you for your interest in this program. And you guys all jumped on in the last 24 hours. And like I said, this was going to be an in-person program, and we were able to bring it to everybody in the comfort of your own home and warm and cozy environment. And I am super excited to hear what you all are going to be trying. I'll send a follow-up email out and get your feedback. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always let us know. And Lissa has a little handout that we'll send to you as a follow-up as well. But Lissa, thank you so much for your time and your information. And you guys can unmute if you have any questions. You want to chit chat or say hi.